The emergency room exploded into chaos. A blood-soaked Special Forces soldier, brought in after an ambush, was breathing heavily, his eyes blazing with fear. Four trauma doctors converged, but he violently roared, "No one touch me!" He vaulted off the gurney, knocking over an instrument tray that crashed loudly. Security radioed, "He might be armed!" The room fell into a standoff. A small, unassuming nurse stepped forward. "Stand down, Sergeant." He spun, hostility radiating. She whispered 6 words known only to one single lost unit. Raven Echo, 50-0. The hardened soldier instantly froze, silence descending like a physical weight. Nurse Hannah Reed, 31, was an essential but often overlooked fixture in the bustling ER. Her colleagues frequently described her as gentle, almost fragile. She had a small build, and her light brown hair was always pulled back in a tight, neat ponytail. Most people believed she was simply too kind, incapable of speaking a single harsh word. This perception led many to severely underestimate her professional value. Hannah consistently volunteered for the toughest shifts. She preferred the deep quiet of the night, taking on the patients others avoided, the homeless, the severely addicted, and those with complex psychiatric issues. She treated every single patient with the same unwavering, quiet dignity. Many senior doctors, however, subtly dismissed her. "She's good-hearted but weak," one physician often commented. "Too slow to react. Better suited for light duty and simple recovery work." Yet a few keen observers noticed the stark contrast between Hannah's gentle demeanor and her extraordinary composure during genuine crises. When a major trauma case arrived, she transformed. Her hands, usually relaxed, became intensely steady. Her blue eyes narrowed, achieving a pinpoint focus that none of her colleagues could explain. It was an instinctual, precise calm that transcended her training. Once, during a mass casualty incident following a severe traffic accident, the lead physician completely missed a subtle post-auricular bleed on a patient. In the rush, it was deemed a minor scratch. Hannah, moving through the controlled chaos, paused. Her sharp eyes detected a tiny, almost invisible seep of crimson behind the ear. She didn't shout. She didn't challenge the doctor. She simply and urgently demanded a microsurgical kit. The entire ER watched in stunned silence as they saved a carotid artery that was moments from rupture. The chief doctor, a man more interested in acclaim than quiet proficiency, promptly claimed the successful outcome in his official report. When a colleague sympathetically asked Hannah if she was upset, she just offered a faint smile. "Saving the person is enough," she replied softly. Other nurses often whispered among themselves, "Why doesn't she ever react? It's like she's used to her credit being stolen." Hannah never challenged authority. She never raised her voice when unfairly reprimanded or overlooked. She was simply a calm force of consistent dedication. After her shift ended, she frequently stayed behind, sitting quietly next to patients who had no family, whispering small, comforting stories to help them find sleep. It was a habit everyone appreciated, but no one understood the source of her profound empathy. There was one peculiar pattern to her behavior. Whenever the hospital lounge television showed footage from a distant war zone, she would immediately turn it off or silently leave the room. Most people guessed she must have lost a loved one in the service. No one knew that every time she heard the distinct whap, whap, whap of heavy helicopter rotors passing overhead, she had to clench her chest, performing a silent exercise to keep her breathing steady and stable. A young resident once innocently asked her about it. "Nurse Hannah, why are you so sensitive to rotor noise?" Hannah simply smiled gently. "Just noise, doctor. It's just noise." But tonight, the thin veneer of her civilian life began to crack. A highly specialized military unit had been ambushed just outside the city limits, and a severely wounded soldier was rushed into the ER. This was Sergeant Mason Hale, 32 years old, suffering from a deep laceration on his right shoulder and 2 dangerous, glancing bullet wounds to his left flank. He needed immediate, careful stitching and stabilization. But Mason was beyond panic. He was in full survival mode, refusing all aid. He was not belligerent, he was terrified. He roared, "None of you understand what has happened to me." The security team exchanged worried glances. Severe PTSD, one mumbled into his radio. A physician, desperate to assert control, shouted, "You must calm down. We are the doctors here." In response, Mason threw a full tray of instruments across the room. His eyes were wide, red, and predatory, like those of a cornered animal preparing for a final fight. Everyone instinctively backed away. Then Hannah moved. She walked slowly, smoothly, never challenging his rhythm. Mason screamed, "Stay away from me!" Hannah stopped exactly 3 meters away. She was not afraid. She spoke in a low, distinct voice. "Sergeant, I have seen those eyes before." His body stuttered, a barely perceptible half-second pause that only someone trained to watch for micro-expressions would catch. Hannah took one single step closer and whispered the 6 words he never expected to hear in a civilian hospital. "Raven Echo, 50-0. The crowded ER went silent. No one understood the meaning of the phrase, but Sergeant Mason Hale instantly collapsed onto his knees, the weight of a shared, painful past crashing down upon him. An old, grizzled veteran, quietly awaiting treatment in the triage area, watched Hannah intently. He slowly managed to mutter to the nurse next to him, "She knows the operational radio code, but that mission was scrubbed from official records." From the moment Hannah spoke the code, Mason stopped fighting. His body language shifted from violent defense to rigid obedience. However, he remained fiercely distrustful of everyone else. "Only she. Nobody else," he repeated, his voice raw. The chief doctor was furious. He stepped forward, his face red with professional indignation. "Nurse, you are only a registered nurse. You do not possess the authority to suture critical field wounds. This is not a drill." Mason, leaning heavily on the gurney, mustered enough strength to roar back, "If she doesn't do it, I will stitch the damn thing myself." Hannah's gaze assessed the wound immediately. Deep, bleeding, and rapidly risking infection. She knew time was the priority. She conceded only slightly. "I will perform the initial field dressing and close the surface bleed. The resident physician can then complete the full suturing." The way she issued the sequence of actions was so perfectly logical and delivered with such calm, non-negotiable authority that the entire room, doctors and nurses included, unconsciously followed her command. As she meticulously disinfected the wound, Mason gritted his teeth against the pain. His left hand instinctively reached out, searching for a phantom weapon or a comrade's reassuring grip, a deep-seated battlefield habit. Hannah gently placed her steady hand over his. "Sergeant, I am right here." He stared at her, a mixture of stark fear and astonished recognition in his eyes. "You? Who are you?" Hannah focused on the wound, deflecting his question. "Just an ER nurse." But as she carefully cut away the remnants of his tactical shirt to inspect the wound, Mason's gaze fell on a thin, almost invisible white scar located just behind her neck, near the hairline. It was the precise type of scar left by prolonged, tight friction from a specialized field communications headset. Suddenly, the night's relative quiet shattered. Gunshots erupted a few blocks away. The ambush was still active. A security guard yelled into the ER, "More casualties are incoming. Repeat, more field casualties are on their way." Hannah tightened the compression bandage around Mason's shoulder. "I need 2 more minutes to stabilize this flow." Mason, his voice now a raspy, desperate whisper, pressed her. 50-0. That was strictly Raven Team's encryption signature. "You couldn't be..." Hannah cut the suture material with a sharp snap. "Hold still. Breathe slowly. Focus only on my voice." The entire hospital staff froze, then snapped into action. Her orders were sharp, accurate, and perfectly prioritized, delivered with the flawless clarity of a military tactical medic. The atmosphere instantly changed. Hesitation vanished, replaced by efficient movement. During the controlled chaos, Mason whispered, his voice gaining strength, "You were a Raven! I recognize the way you constantly scan every door and window, ma'am." Hannah finished the preliminary stitching, securing the wound with the clinical speed of a surgeon. "Don't say another word," Mason persisted. "Raven Team was decimated on the last mission. Everyone thought..." Hannah's hands paused for a single, fleeting second, a moment of stillness charged with overwhelming, visible grief. It was all the confirmation Mason needed. She was the sole, silent survivor. The initial trauma was managed. Mason was stable enough to survive, but far from fit for transport. And then, the real crisis arrived. A heavily armed military verification team, led by two stern-faced officers, stormed into the ER. Their mission: they were here for Mason. Rumors had reached command that Mason was the last living witness to a high-level corruption case involving procurement funds at his home base. They intended to extract him before any official, independent investigation could begin. Hannah immediately stepped away from the gurney and positioned herself squarely between Mason and the security detail. "The patient is medically unfit for movement," she stated, her voice quiet but absolute. The lead officer sneered. "Nurse, you have no jurisdiction here. We are on official military orders." Hannah looked the officer directly in the eye, her gaze unflinching. Her reply was low but razor sharp. "Article 12, Combat Trauma Override. Critically compromised patients are not to be moved without the explicit consent of the treating tactical authority." The security detail's faces darkened. They were stunned. The chief doctor, watching from the periphery, gasped. How does she know that clause? Only us specialized tactical military medics are even taught that regulation. An older security guard in the delegation, a veteran who had been with the service for decades, pushed past his younger colleagues. He stared intently at Hannah's face. Then his eyes widened, suddenly recognizing a ghost from the old operational theater. You are the shadow medic of Raven Team," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I heard the stories. You were the one who saved 19 men during the border shelling that night." Hannah offered no verbal confirmation, but in her eyes a lifetime of painful, suppressed memories flickered vividly to life. The news tore through the base like a lightning strike. Someone in the ER knows the operational code of the blacklisted Raven Team. The hospital hallway became a bottleneck of curious, terrified, and expectant faces. The base security team, realizing their cover was blown but desperate to complete their objective, attempted to physically drag Mason off the gurney. Mason cried out in pain and desperation, fighting the restraints. "Hannah, don't let them take me." Hannah stood her ground, her body a rigid shield in the center of the room. The gentle, approachable nurse was gone, replaced by a persona of lethal, controlled authority, the commander of a battlefield rescue. She said clearly, choosing every word precisely, "The patient is unstable. His vitals are compromised. If Sergeant Hale dies due to forced displacement, I will personally submit a full report, citing your names directly to the Judge Advocate General's Corps and the Department of Defense." Nasser, the security officer who had initially sneered earlier, scoffed, trying one last time to regain control. "And who exactly do you think you are, to claim that level of authority, nurse?" Hannah didn't answer with words. Slowly, deliberately, she adjusted the neckline of her pale blue scrub top. On her upper left chest, just above her heart, an intricate tattoo was revealed, the unmistakable image of a black raven opening its powerful wings, with a small, stylized number 7 etched at the base. The entire hallway, the security detail, the doctors, the onlookers, frozen in collective, stunned silence. A young private stationed near the door mumbled a legend he thought was fiction. "Raven 7, that was the specialized sniper medic squad, the ghost unit trained by the command themselves, the one everyone thought was entirely liquidated." The lead security officer stumbled backward, his arrogance completely dissolving into terror. "No, that's impossible. The files, they were scrubbed." Hannah's voice rang out, sharp and decisive, cutting through the fear. "Raven Team was not entirely lost. I am the last one." A nearby resident physician nearly dropped his stethoscope to the floor. Mason, despite his pain, leveraged himself up on the gurney, his eyes filling with tears of relief and disbelief. "Ma'am, ghost medic?" Hannah met his gaze, offering a slight, almost imperceptible nod, the confirmation he had risked his life for. The room instantly exploded into chaotic whispers and gasps. The panicked security officer, realizing the terrifying depth of his miscalculation, stammered, We, we cannot engage anyone with your level of active clearance or classification." Hannah took a deliberate step toward them, her eyes like chips of cold blue ice. "Leave this hospital immediately." The security team broke rank, retreating in total disarray, their mission annihilated by a single quiet nurse. The ER staff stood rigid. The chief doctor swallowed hard, his voice reduced to a humble whisper. "Hannah, you are the legend they talk about?" she replied, her voice regaining a calm, focused quality. "No, I am just a person doing my duty." But the story wasn't over. Just as the tension started to ease, the second, more explosive twist occurred. The heavy, unmistakable whap, whap, whap of a military rotor descended directly overhead. The building shook violently. The hospital security chief shouted, "Black Hawk on the roof! Special Forces insertion!" A heavily armored team of soldiers in black tactical gear stormed into the ER from the emergency stairwell. The soldier leading the charge, bearing the insignia of a major, was large and imposing. His voice boomed across the room, demanding to know, "Where is the person who spoke the Raven Echo code?" Hannah calmly stepped forward. The major stopped dead in his tracks. His imposing posture immediately snapped into a rigid, military salute. The salute one gives to a superior officer. "Ma'am," everyone present, the doctors, the nurses, the recovering patients, nearly collapsed in shock, witnessing a battle-hardened Special Forces major salute a small, tired-looking nurse. The major continued, his voice now lower, deferential. "We received direct orders from Central Command. If this is truly the Ghost Medic, you are granted temporary absolute tactical authority to secure and protect the witness, Sergeant Mason Hale, for a period of 48 hours. The chief doctor looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Mason looked at Hannah as though she were a miracle given human form. "You saved me again, ma'am." Hannah offered a small correction. "There is no debt, Sergeant. We shared the same battlefield." The major turned to the entire ER staff, his voice hardening once more. "Any individual who attempts to move this patient or interferes with this officer's command will be held accountable to the full extent of the Uniform Code of Military Justice." The crowd finally dispersed, their fear tempered with an overwhelming, profound respect. Rourke, a young soldier who had often mocked Hannah's quiet nature, knelt immediately in the crowded hallway. "Ma'am, I am so deeply sorry." Hannah placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Respect anyone in medical uniform. They save more lives than you think. If you believe that the quietest people are often the most courageous, comment. I believe." The transformation of the hospital environment was immediate and total. Hannah's revealed identity did not change her work ethic, but it completely changed how every single person interacted with her. She continued to work the night shifts. She still took the difficult, unwanted patients. But now when she offered a suggestion, the lead physicians listened as if they were receiving mission-critical tactical intelligence. They understood that her clinical observations were informed by a brutal, non-theoretical wisdom forged in combat. The younger nurses, previously hesitant, now flocked to her. They asked her not just how to start an IV, but how to manage field trauma and how to maintain absolute calm when a patient was spiraling into panic. Hannah taught them all, gently and without any hint of her rank. "Panic is contagious," she explained one evening while prepping a surgical pack. "You must control the chaos inside you before you can control the chaos outside. That is the true triage." Mason, slowly beginning his recovery, watched her with deep, newfound reverence. He asked her the inevitable question that everyone wanted to know. "Ma'am, why did you leave the field? Why did you give up a command position for this?" Hannah looked down at her hands, tracing the faint lines on her palm. "I didn't want to see any more of my teammates die." Mason bowed his head. "But today you stepped back into the fight. You saved another one of us." Expansion start. One afternoon, when the ward was quiet, Mason felt compelled to bring up the code again. "Raven Echo, 50-0, he murmured, his eyes distant. It wasn't just encryption. It was the kill count, wasn't it? 50 enemy combatants down, 0 losses on our side. The day we lost command and had to exfiltrate on foot. Hannah froze, her back to him. She slowly turned. It means we won the battle but lost the war, Sergeant. We proved we were the best, then the system failed us. Her voice was heavy with old grief. It's a secret not because of the kill, but because of the shame of being forgotten. Mason finally understood the full weight of the words she had whispered to break his panic. It wasn't just a code. It was a wound they shared. The change in the ER was most evident in the chief doctor, Dr. Evans. He was a man of immense professional pride and an unfortunate dose of arrogance. After the major departed, Evans avoided Hannah for an entire shift. Finally, he cornered her near the supply closet, his face etched with genuine humility. "Hannah," he began, struggling to find the right words, "I owe you an apology for every time I dismissed you, for every time I undervalued your quiet competence. I let my ego and my title blind me to your skill. I thought kindness was a weakness." Hannah looked at him, not with judgment, but with her characteristic, measured calm. "Doctor, you have never lacked skill, only perspective. Military medicine is about doing the most with the least, under impossible pressure. Civilian medicine has its own pressures. We are both here to heal." Evans nodded, looking defeated yet relieved. "I need your help. We need to incorporate your methods, your calm, into our trauma training, officially. I want you to head the new Rapid Response Triage Unit. It will be under my authority, but your tactical command." The offer was stunning, a role specifically created to utilize her unique battlefield expertise. Hannah paused, her eyes scanning the ceiling, processing the immense responsibility. "I accept, Doctor, but my requirement is simple. The staff must understand that a title is less important than the skill behind it. You must teach them to listen to everyone, not just the names on the door." Evans agreed instantly. The lesson of respect, learned through a moment of crisis, had fundamentally changed the institution. Expansion end. Internal base chatter spread. "The ghost medic is working at the civilian hospital." Many veterans sought her out, not for treatment, but to thank her. One old man brought his worn unit patch and placed it on Hannah's hand. "This belonged to my unit. I want you to keep it." Hannah gently returned it. "You should keep your memory, sir." Those who had previously mocked Hannah in the hospital now changed their attitude, learning to respect nurses and those who quietly dedicated themselves to their work. One evening, Mason asked, "If you went back to the military, you would be given a high rank." Hannah looked at the sky through the ER window. "I don't need rank. I need peace. If you believe that kindness is a powerful force that can fundamentally transform an entire community, comment. I will live kindly." 2 weeks after the incident, Sergeant Mason Hale was finally discharged from the hospital. His wounds were clean, his prognosis excellent. He stood at the entrance of the ER, his posture rigid. He offered Hannah a sharp military salute. "Thank you for seeing me, ma'am. Thank you for seeing me when all I wanted was to disappear." Hannah replied with a genuine, gentle warmth. "You have a mission to complete, Sergeant. Go and live a life worthy of the men who are no longer here. That's the only way to honor the code." Mason nodded, his face etched with fierce, renewed determination. He turned and walked out, ready to face the world and the military investigation, protected by the truth she had revealed. Hannah returned to her workstation, resuming her routine, but with a new air of respect surrounding her. She continued her shift, calm and focused. But this time, every doctor who passed her desk, including Dr. Evans, paused briefly to acknowledge her. "Thank you, Hannah," they would say, a genuine respect now carried in their voices. In Hannah's small, functional locker, next to the old wooden box that held her classified JSOC patch, lay a new folded piece of paper. It was a note from Mason. It read simply, "You saved my life twice. I won't forget the code." Hannah smiled faintly, placing the note next to an old, slightly faded photograph of the entire Raven team. 6 young, hopeful faces. The note was not a monument to her power, but a quiet, peaceful closure to a painful chapter. During her late-night break, she stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the city. As she stood there, a military Black Hawk helicopter, not belonging to the base but bearing the dark, ominous insignia of special operations, flew low over the hospital complex. It did not land. It simply dipped its nose in a slow, deep, ceremonial wing salute, an honor reserved only for the highest-ranking combat commanders. Hannah placed her hand over her heart, bowing her head slightly in return. "I am still here," she whispered to the distant aircraft, "and I will still save lives." Dr. Evans found her there moments later. "The paperwork for the new triage unit is finalized, Commander Reed," he said, calling her by her newly established operational title, a sign of his deep respect. "What's our first order of business?" Hannah turned, the moonlight catching the Raven 7 tattoo on her chest. "Our first order," she said, her voice clear, "is to teach everyone that the patient is the mission, and every staff member, from orderly to surgeon, is mission critical." Under the soft, fluorescent lights of the hospital, she was no longer the feared ghost medic of Raven 7. She was Hannah Reed, the respected tactical nurse commander, whose strength lay not in the ranks she held, but in the institutional change she humbly inspired, a silent testament to the enduring power of compassion and hidden competence. If you believe stories of quiet dedication, hidden strength, and uncompromising integrity deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to The Veteran Story. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.